She laughed, "I'm free," and handed me divorce papers. I signed them. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. My wife slid the divorce papers across the table, laughed in my face, and said, "I'm finally free." So, I picked up the heavy brass pen and signed them. I didn't hesitate. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. And I certainly didn't fight for my assets. Across the sterile corporate conference room, Vanessa's cheap, aggressive lawyer looked like the cat that swallowed the canary. He had come prepared for a bloody legal war over the high-end, modern home I had designed myself, the investment portfolios, and the architectural firm I built from the ground up. Instead, I just flipped to the last page, scribbled my name, and pushed the thick stack of legal documents back across the polished mahogany. Vanessa's laughter echoed off the glass walls. She looked radiant, practically vibrating with arrogant triumph. She was 38, dressed in a designer suit she bought with my money, fully believing she had just outsmarted the man she'd been married to for 10 years. She thought she was walking away with millions and her absolute freedom, ready to sprint into the arms of her wealthy investor boyfriend. What she didn't know was that her perfect escape plan was a beautifully constructed illusion. I am an architect. I don't just draw pretty pictures. I calculate load-bearing walls, I anticipate structural failures, and I build things to last. When you discover a fatal crack in your foundation, you don't just paint over it. You tear the whole thing down. For half a year, I had played the role of the oblivious, overworked husband. I smiled through dinners, I kissed her cheek, and I secretly worked with my ruthless veteran divorce attorney, Elias, who was currently sitting next to me with a perfectly blank expression. By signing those papers, I wasn't surrendering half of my life's work to a cheating spouse. I was legally trapping her inside a collapsing building. I was uncoupling myself from the massive, fraudulent debts she had secretly taken out to fund her luxurious new life. As the ink dried on the final page, Vanessa stood up, smoothed her skirt, and gave me a look of pure, unadulterated pity. She thought she had won the ultimate game. She had no idea I had been building this exact trap for 6 long, agonizing months. 10 years ago, Vanessa and I actually made sense together. I was a young architect, grinding out 80-hour weeks to get my firm off the ground, surviving on black coffee and sheer stubbornness. She was in marketing, sharp, ambitious, and seemingly grounded. We built our life brick by brick. When my firm finally landed a massive commercial contract, everything changed. We suddenly had real money. Not just comfortable money, but the kind of wealth that alters your zip code and your social circle. I bought a prime piece of land in the suburbs and spent 2 years designing and building our dream home. It was a modernist masterpiece, all glass, steel, and natural light. But the moment we moved in, the woman I married started to vanish, replaced by someone I barely recognized. Have you ever watched someone you love become consumed by their own reflection? It started with country club memberships and $1,000 shoes. Then it was the endless charity galas where the only actual charity was feeding the egos of the board members. Vanessa became obsessed with status, keeping up appearances, and rubbing elbows with the local elite. I preferred spending my weekends in my studio. She preferred being seen at the right brunch spots. I became nothing more than the general contractor of her lifestyle, the invisible wallet funding her meticulously curated social media presence. She started making passive-aggressive jokes about my work boots at her dinner parties, calling me her charming little blue-collar creative. The distance between us grew from a crack into a massive canyon. I convinced myself it was just a phase, that the novelty of wealth would eventually wear off. I kept my head down, kept designing, and kept funneling money into our joint accounts to keep her happy. I thought a strong financial foundation was enough to keep the marriage stable, ignoring the rot spreading through the support beams. I had no idea just how weak the structure had become until the whole damn thing came crashing down on my head. The illusion of my marriage shattered on a random Tuesday because of a forgotten password. It happened exactly 6 months ago. I came home early from a site visit, covered in drywall dust and exhausted. The house was empty. Vanessa was supposedly at a networking retreat for the weekend. I went into her home office to print a contract and saw her old backup iPad sitting on the desk, plugged in and glowing. She had bought a new one weeks ago and must have forgotten to wipe this one. As I reached for the printer, the iPad screen lit up with a notification. It wasn't a text. It was a message from an encrypted app that had somehow mirrored to the old device. The preview read, "Can't wait to wake up next to you again. Hotel is booked." My blood turned to ice. I didn't want to look. Every instinct told me to walk away, to preserve the structural integrity of my life, but my hands moved on their own. I picked up the tablet, bypassed the old passcode I knew she used, and opened the app. The visceral, physical sickness that hit me is hard to describe. It felt like the floor had violently dropped out from under me. There were months of messages between Vanessa and a man named Marcus. He was saved under a fake vendor name, but the chat was filled with undeniable proof. There were photos. Humiliating, explicit photos taken in our bed, in the kitchen I designed, and in luxury hotel rooms I had unknowingly paid for. My chest tightened so hard I couldn't breathe. I stumbled to the bathroom and threw up until my stomach was empty. I sat on the cold tile floor, staring at the walls of the house I built for us, feeling entirely hollowed out. Marcus wasn't just a fling. The texts revealed he was a venture capitalist. She talked about how he truly understood her drive, how I was just a boring workaholic holding her back from her true potential. She was mocking me to him, laughing at my dedication. The pain was paralyzing, a dark heavy weight pressing against my ribs. I wanted to smash the iPad, burn her clothes, and scream until my throat bled. I was seconds away from calling her and tearing our lives apart. I had my phone in my hand, my thumb hovering over her contact name. I was shaking with a terrifying, blinding rage. But as I stared at her smiling contact photo, the architect in me, the cold, calculating part of my brain that solves complex structural problems, suddenly snapped awake. Screaming at her wouldn't fix the foundation. It would only give her the opportunity to hide her assets and play the victim. If I confronted her now, she would spin the narrative, hire a shark, and drag me through years of agonizing litigation. I forced myself to breathe. I put my phone down. I picked the iPad back up. I pushed past the nausea, ignoring the explicit photos, and started reading the messages like a forensic accountant analyzing a ledger. I dug deeper into the timeline, and the betrayal shifted from emotional to financial. Have you ever realized the person sleeping next to you is actively plotting your ruin? Between the romantic garbage, they were talking business. Vanessa was planning an exit strategy. She and Marcus were discussing a lucrative startup investment. I found screenshots she had sent him of our joint investment accounts. She was slowly, methodically siphoning small, untraceable amounts of marital funds and funneling them into a hidden LLC registered under her maiden name. Her plan was to drain enough liquid cash to start a new, fabulous life with Marcus, and then hit me with divorce papers when my guard was completely down. She wanted to blindside me and leave me holding the bag for the mortgage and the business liabilities. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. She genuinely believed I was too focused on my blueprints to notice her stealing the concrete right out from under my feet. The visceral pain of a broken heart slowly evaporated, replaced by a dark, absolute, and razor-sharp focus. I wasn't just dealing with a cheating wife. I was dealing with a hostile takeover. I needed to build a defense so watertight it would absolutely drown her. I realized I needed a legal mercenary who understood how to wage a silent war. The very next morning, I bypassed the flashy, billboard advertising divorce lawyers and walked into the sterile, intimidating downtown office of Elias. Elias is 60 years old, wears suits that cost more than my first car, and possesses the warmth of a great white shark. He is a veteran of high-net-worth bloodbaths. I sat in his leather chair, handed him a flash drive containing the entire exported chat history and the financial screenshots, and told him everything. Elias didn't flinch. He just calmly poured 2 glasses of scotch, handed me one, and said, "We don't get mad, Julian. We get everything." Over the next week, Elias and his team of private investigators quietly dug into the hidden LLC and the mysterious venture capitalist, Marcus. I went to work, pretending everything was normal, while my legal team x-rayed her entire life. 10 days later, Elias called me back into his office. He slid a thick manila folder across the desk. "Your wife thinks she's Bonnie to his Clyde," Elias said, a dark smirk playing on his lips. "But she's just his next mark." He opened the folder. The bombshell hit me like a freight train. Marcus wasn't a venture capitalist. His real name was Mark Davies. He had 0 assets, a string of failed businesses, and a lengthy criminal record for wire fraud in 3 different states. He was a career con man whose specific modus operandi was targeting wealthy, dissatisfied, arrogant wives. He would convince them to steal from their husbands, funnel the money into a joint business venture, and then vanish into thin air the moment the cash cleared his offshore accounts. Vanessa wasn't just cheating on me. She was actively being swindled by a professional predator. She was voluntarily walking into a financial slaughterhouse, believing she held the knife. I stared at Marcus's mugshot, a strange mixture of absolute disgust and dark amusement washing over me. Elias looked me in the eye and asked how I wanted to handle the execution. So, Elias said, steepling his fingers, do we show her the file, warn her, and serve the papers now? Or do we let her jump off the cliff? The moral choice hung in the air. For a fleeting second, the ghost of the man who loved her hesitated. We had shared a decade of our lives. Did I really have it in me to watch her destroy herself, knowing I held the blueprint to save her? I told Elias I needed a day to think. That evening, Vanessa came home from a spa day that her location history proved was actually a hotel rendezvous with Marcus. I was sitting at the kitchen island, reviewing some project budgets, genuinely conflicted. She poured herself a glass of imported wine, leaned against the marble counter, and looked at my paperwork with utter disdain. Still crunching pennies, Julian? She sighed, swirling her wine. You know, if you had a little more vision, you wouldn't have to work so hard. Some men just inherently understand how to multiply wealth. You just draw lines on paper. She laughed, a sharp, condescending sound that echoed in the kitchen I built for her. In that single, cruel, unprompted moment, the last flickering ember of my empathy was permanently extinguished. She wasn't a victim being manipulated. She was a greedy, arrogant accomplice who thought she was vastly superior to the man paying for her wine. She was willing to bankrupt me to fund her fantasy. I looked at her, smiled softly, and said, "You're right, Vanessa. I really need to start thinking bigger." I excused myself, walked out to my car, and immediately called Elias from the driveway. The night air was freezing, but my mind was burning with absolute, tactical clarity. I gave my lawyer the green light to proceed with the most ruthless strategy we had. The architect had left the building, and the demolition expert was now fully in charge. The next 5 months were an exercise in psychological torture. Sleeping next to a woman who is actively stealing from you, while you are actively plotting her legal annihilation, requires a sociopathic level of self-control. Every morning I woke up, kissed her forehead, and went to work. Every evening I listened to her lie about her day, nodding and playing the exhausted, oblivious husband. I was a ghost haunting my own life, meticulously documenting every text, every withdrawal, and every lie. Elias and I needed her to accelerate her timeline and legally detach herself from my assets before she realized Marcus was a phantom. To do that, we needed to exploit her greatest weakness, her insatiable greed, and her absolute terror of losing her status. The trap required bait. Over dinner one night, I poured myself a heavy glass of whiskey, rubbed my eyes, and let out a long, defeated sigh. I casually mentioned that my architectural firm was facing massive, unexpected legal liabilities. I fabricated a story about a structural failure on a major commercial project, hinting that a devastating, multi-million-dollar lawsuit was imminent. "It's bad, Vanessa," I lied, looking absolutely terrified. "If they pierce the corporate veil, they could come after everything. Our personal accounts, the investments, even the house. I might lose it all." I watched her eyes widen in sheer panic. The thought of losing her designer lifestyle and being dragged down into financial ruin with me was her worst nightmare. She immediately stopped eating, her mind racing. I could practically see the gears turning in her head as she calculated how to save herself from my sinking ship. She didn't offer a single word of comfort or support. She only cared about protecting the stolen money she planned to hand to a criminal. Vanessa swallowed the bait whole. Less than 48 hours after my fabricated confession about the impending lawsuit, she approached me with a look of manufactured, solemn concern. She sat me down in the living room and delivered a highly rehearsed speech about how we needed to be smart and protect the family. Her solution was a post-nuptial agreement. She claimed it was to legally separate her personal assets and her new, independent business ventures from my firm's toxic liabilities. "If your company goes under, Julian, We need to make sure they can't take my accounts too, she said, feigning empathy. It's the only way to ensure we have a safety net. I acted insulted, then defeated, and finally, reluctantly agreed. What she was actually doing was trying to legally fence off the money she had already stolen, ensuring I couldn't touch it when she filed for divorce. But arrogance creates massive blind spots. In her rush to build a firewall against my fake debt, she brought the post-nup draft to a cheap, aggressive lawyer who didn't look closely at my updated financials. Elias, operating in the shadows, ensured the contract was ironclad. By signing the agreement to protect herself from my imaginary bankruptcy, Vanessa unknowingly waived all her rights to my actual, highly profitable business accounts, the equity in my firm, and the massive commercial payouts that were scheduled to hit my accounts the following quarter. She was so desperate to abandon ship that she legally surrendered her seat in the lifeboat. The moment the notary stamped that document, she severed her access to my wealth. She thought she was building an impenetrable fortress to protect her glorious future with Marcus. She had no idea she had just locked herself inside a cage of her own making. With the postnup signed, Vanessa felt invincible. She believed she was legally untouchable and entirely separate from my impending ruin. Now, she and Marcus needed the capital for their grand escape. Her hidden LLC was meant to be the vehicle for Marcus's fake venture capital project, but she hadn't managed to siphon enough cash from my accounts before the postnup cut her off. Marcus, playing the role of the high roller, started pressuring her. He fed her lies about a closing window on a guaranteed crypto real estate hybrid investment, insisting they needed liquidity immediately. Vanessa panicked. Driven by greed and the fear of losing her glamorous new life, she made the fatal error Elias and I were banking on. She began secretly taking out massive, high-interest loans. Because of the postnup, she could only borrow against the assets held solely in her name. She leveraged her personal investment portfolio, took out aggressive personal lines of credit, and even maxed out hidden credit cards to funnel cash into the LLC. I sat in Elias's office, drinking dark roast coffee, watching the digital paper trail grow in real time. Elias had legally subpoenaed the LLC records under the guise of an unrelated audit. We watched her borrow $50,000, then $100,000, then $250,000. She was signing catastrophic loan agreements, absolutely convinced that Marcus was going to triple the money in a matter of weeks. She was building a towering skyscraper of toxic debt on a foundation of pure sand. The beauty of the trap was that my fingerprints were nowhere on it. I wasn't forcing her into debt. Her own arrogance and infidelity were holding the pen. She was digging a financial grave so deep that she would never see daylight again. The final weeks leading up to the detonation were surreal. The tension in the house was thick enough to choke on. Vanessa was practically vibrating with smug superiority. She treated me like dead weight, rolling her eyes when I spoke, staying out late, and flaunting her detachment. She was already mentally living in a penthouse with Marcus, viewing me as nothing more than an unfortunate stepping stone she was about to discard. I played my part perfectly, walking around with slumped shoulders, looking stressed and defeated by my imaginary legal battles. But behind the scenes, I was executing a flawless structural reinforcement of my own life. While she was busy signing away her soul to high-interest lenders, Elias and I were quietly moving my secured assets. With the postnup firmly in place, I transferred the remaining joint funds into private accounts she couldn't access. I legally restructured the deed to the house, transferring it entirely into a trust that I exclusively controlled, perfectly shielded by the clauses her own lawyer had drafted. I was a ghost in my own home, systematically erasing her name from my reality. Every piece of furniture she bought, every piece of art she hung on the walls, it all officially belonged to me. The sheer discipline required to not smile when she complained about the Wi-Fi or the landscaping was agonizing. I was watching a woman polish the brass on the Titanic after the iceberg had already hit. Her loans had finally cleared, and $500,000 of borrowed cash sat in her LLC, waiting for Marcus to invest it. The trap was fully loaded, the safety was off, and all I had to do was wait for her to pull the trigger. The execution date arrived on a rainy Thursday when she finally demanded a formal meeting. She sent me a calendar invite. Not a text, not a conversation over coffee, but a sterile, corporate calendar invite titled Discussion of Our Future. She requested we meet at a rented conference room downtown, not at our house. When I walked through the glass doors, the setup was exactly as I had pictured. Vanessa was sitting at the head of the long mahogany table, wearing a sharp designer suit, exuding absolute power. Next to her sat her cheap, aggressive divorce lawyer, a guy who looked like he lived on energy drinks and spite. They had a massive stack of papers arranged neatly in front of them. She expected me to walk in alone, looking exhausted and broken by my failing architectural firm. She expected an ambush where I would crumble and beg. But the moment the door clicked shut behind me, the dynamic violently shifted. I didn't sit down immediately. I stepped aside, and Elias walked into the room. He wore a custom three-piece suit and carried a slim, black leather briefcase. The smug smile on Vanessa's lawyer's face instantly vanished. He recognized Elias. Any lawyer in the city worth their salt knew Elias was a legal apex predator who only handled high-stakes executions. Vanessa frowned, clearly confused by the sudden change in atmospheric pressure, but her arrogance quickly masked her doubt. "Julian, I don't know why you brought expensive counsel," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is a very simple, straightforward dissolution. The postnup dictates the terms. I am leaving you, and I am taking my assets with me." Elias slowly unclasped his briefcase, pulled out a single folder, and slid it over to my side of the table. I sat down, looked my treacherous wife dead in the eye, and told her to proceed. We were finally back to the moment the ink dried. Vanessa slid the divorce papers across the table, laughed in my face, and proudly declared, "I'm finally free." I picked up the heavy brass pen and signed them without blinking. I flipped the stack back to her lawyer. Vanessa smiled, a vicious, triumphant grin. "You know, Julian, I almost feel bad for you. Your firm is failing. You're about to be sued into oblivion, and now you're losing me. But I have an investor who actually values my worth." I leaned back in my chair, the silence in the room stretching until it was almost deafening. "I know about Marcus," I said quietly. Her smug smile froze. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like a medical emergency. "I've known about him for 6 months," I continued, my voice dead calm. "I also know his real name is Mark Davies. And I know he isn't an investor. He is a convicted fraudster." Her lawyer scrambled to grab the postnup, panic setting in. Elias finally spoke, his voice like grinding stones. "By signing that postnup, Mrs. Davies, excuse me, soon-to-be ex-Mrs., you legally isolated all of your personal debts. The $500,000 in high-interest loans you secretly took out to fund your LLC, that is entirely your liability. Mr. Julian's firm is highly profitable. The lawsuit was an absolute fiction." Vanessa stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, unable to form words. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and dialed Marcus. It went straight to a disconnected number tone. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and looked down at the woman who had tried to destroy me. I told her to enjoy her freedom, turned my back, and walked out of the room. The structural collapse of Vanessa's life took exactly 48 hours. The fallout was faster and more brutal than even Elias had predicted. By Friday evening, my phone was exploding with frantic, hysterical voicemails. I didn't answer a single one. I just listened to them echo in my quiet, empty house. Through her sobbing recordings, the full scope of the devastation became clear. After fleeing the conference room, she had rushed to the bank to check the LLC accounts. Marcus had drained every single penny. He had executed a flawless wire transfer to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands the moment her loan funds had cleared, leaving her with a zero balance and a disconnected burner phone. He was a ghost. There was no startup, there was no penthouse, and there was no luxurious new life. There was only the crushing, suffocating weight of reality. Because of the postnup she had so eagerly demanded to protect herself from my fake bankruptcy, she had absolutely no legal claim to my assets, my home, or my business. The banks that issued her the high-interest loans didn't care that she had been scammed by her lover. They only cared that her signature was on the dotted line. She was officially on the hook for over $500,000 in fraudulent debt, with zero assets to liquidate. She had traded a 10-year marriage to a loyal architect for a masterclass in criminal grifting. Her wealthy friends stopped answering her calls the moment the scandal leaked. She was evicted from the luxury hotel Marcus had booked under her credit card. The grand, arrogant empire she thought she was building had turned out to be a paper house in a hurricane. With nowhere else to go, she desperately tried to crawl back to the foundation she destroyed. It was raining heavily on Sunday night when the security buzzer at my front gate rang. I looked at the camera feed. Vanessa was standing in the downpour, drenched, mascara running down her face, looking absolutely broken. She had been locked out of her accounts and had nowhere to go. I pressed the intercom button and opened the gate. I didn't do it out of pity. I did it because a building is never truly finished until the final inspection. I opened the front door and let her stand on the porch. She didn't have the audacity to step inside. "Julian, please," she sobbed, shivering violently. "He took everything. Marcus stole it all. I was manipulated. I made a mistake, but I'm your wife. You have to help me. They're going to garnish my wages forever. Please, I have nothing." She looked pathetic, a hollow shell of the arrogant woman who had laughed in my face just days ago. I looked at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just the cold satisfaction of a perfectly executed design. I reached onto the entryway table, picked up a thick manila envelope Elias had prepared, and handed it to her. "What is this?" she whispered, her hands shaking. "It's the printed chat logs between you and Marcus, highlighting the exact moments you mocked my career, plotted to steal my money, and called me a stepping stone," I said smoothly. "It's the blueprint of your own lies. You aren't my wife anymore, Vanessa. You're just a bad investment I successfully liquidated." She stared at the envelope, a fresh wave of horrified tears spilling over her cheeks. I didn't wait for her to speak. I stepped back into my home, looked her in the eyes, and firmly closed the door. It has been a year since that rainy Sunday night. Vanessa filed for bankruptcy, but because the loans were obtained under fraudulent pretenses to fund an LLC, the courts refused to discharge the majority of the debt. She now works a grueling entry-level marketing job, funneling almost her entire paycheck to aggressive collection agencies. She lives in a cramped studio apartment on the bad side of town, permanently exiled from the high society life she sacrificed her soul to achieve. As for me, the silence in my house is no longer a void. It is a profound, peaceful canvas. My architectural firm had its most profitable year on record. I spend my weekends designing what I want, surrounded by people who value character over zip codes. The entire ordeal fundamentally changed how I view relationships. I learned that you can pour the strongest concrete in the world, but if the person you are building a life with is secretly chipping away at the pillars, the roof will inevitably collapse. Loyalty isn't just about what someone does to your face. It is entirely defined by what they do behind your back when they think they hold all the cards. If you ever discover that your partner is plotting your ruin, do not confront them in a fit of rage. Emotion is the enemy of strategy. Become a ghost. Hire a professional. Secure your foundation, gather your evidence, and let their own arrogance blind them to the trap you are setting. Sometimes, the most brutal and effective revenge isn't tearing the other person down. Sometimes, the ultimate revenge is simply opening the door, stepping out of the way, and letting them destroy themselves. I built a life that no one can ever tear down, and I am truly free.